I've been steeped in the world of CRE for over a decade. I've seen loopholes and cheap financing mechanisms of all kinds. EB5 money from China, Tay's bond money from Israel, you name it. But I've never seen something quite as gloriously gameable as the Traveling HFC. This Texas property tax forgiveness vehicle has been the main character and main villain in the multifamily market for the past 18 months or so. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of deals have gone through the program. It's been a crazy gold rush for consultants, attorneys, and debt brokers. But the party is now coming to a dramatic end. Welcome back to the Promote Podcast, your insider guide to the money and mania of the CRE markets. Hiten here with Will.
What's up?
Today, we talk Traveling HFCs, the mother of all property tax loopholes. We have a special guest joining us for that part of the discussion. We also break down the state of play at one of Manhattan's most anticipated condo projects. 80 Clarkson is the heaviest of heavies in the mix and is bringing billionaires row pricing to downtown.
I'm old enough to remember when it was 570 Washington.
Right? There was billions of dollars worth of multifamily property trading in Texas, let's call it between 2020 and 2022, right? Most of it financed with floating rate debt. A lot of new names came into the mix. We've talked about a bunch of them before.
Texas always is just the land of boom and bust. And every single cycle, there's like something different that gets it going. And This poured oil on the fire, as they might say, down in Texas.
So what happened here was the bet was twofold, right? That rates would stay low for a long time and rents would keep going up. And this was true for a while, a couple of years where this was, people, we talked about this last time, Tides equities, they made out like bandits for a long time until they didn't. So rates turn, rents stop growing at that crazy pace that they were growing, and what you're left with is a shit ton of distress.
Exactly. And so you need to find a way with rents going down, your interest payments going up, you need to make NOI go up. And the only way to do that here was to lower your expenses. And a lot of these people don't really operate the properties super well anyway. And the biggest line to cut is taxes. And man, did they find a doozy of a loophole.
Especially in Texas, right? Property taxes are a big, big sticking point in Texas.
Well, Hiten, I'm not sure if you know this, but in the business utopia of Texas, there are no state income taxes.
Yes.
However, shockingly, it does cost money to, run a city. So the only way that the municipalities can generate revenue like that without the income taxes is through property taxes. And his good friend says there's really one true landlord, and it might just be the Travis County Municipal Taxing Authority.
So what happened here was they needed to figure out how to bring their property taxes down, and they stumbled upon, I don't know how to I can't even make this, I can't hype it up enough. Like they found this unbelievable grift.
Yeah.
It's called the Traveling HFC. So basically the way it works was you would go to a random authority in the boonies somewhere in Texas, Pecos County, Cameron County, etc. Through them, you would form a kind of a GP-JV entity through a ground lease. Okay. And so you had this HFC entity. And then all you had to do was pledge to keep a certain portion of your units affordable in the jurisdiction that you own the property or plan to develop it. And in exchange, your property taxes were gone forever. Forever. They were just wiped off the rolls.
And bear in mind that affordability is in the eye of the beholder. In a lot of these markets, what is deemed affordable is higher than what market rents are. So you're really doing nothing.
This is precisely the point. We're going to talk about this with our guest in a bit. But in some cases, you basically had to agree to keep the rents at a level that were higher than what the market was bearing at the time.
Correct.
So you had to give away nothing. And in exchange, you got property taxes wiped off your tax rolls, which meant that a quote unquote dog shit deal could become an okay deal. A good deal could become a great deal. And then you had a long-term financing exit as well through the agencies, through CMBS and all that.
That's the most important thing, is that the agencies and lenders would actually underwrite the no taxes.
Yeah.
If you're going through a tax abatement or a phased-in abatement, like Philadelphia had one, Baltimore has one, like a lot of these cities have for new development, step down.
Yeah.
So 100% abatement year one, 90, 80, 70, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times it's really hard to get a lender to underwrite the abatement, especially if it's being phased out, because they'll just say, well, when you go to sell this or refi our loan, your taxes are going to be much higher. So we got to just assume it's like that from day one. If they're gone forever, to quote the Sandlot, forever. Then the lenders can underwrite it. So
it takes off the regulatory uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so this is persisting for a couple of years. It spawned, and this is something we talk about a lot on the Promote podcast, is like this army of middlemen just popped up from everywhere. Debt brokers from New York were making a killing on these traveling HFC deals. You had all these consultants pop up, sponsors who said, oh, this is a marketable product that we have. This might be more lucrative than actually building housing. And they started because they knew the right consultants. They knew which jurisdictions to tie up with, in many cases, places like Garland County, Cameron County, Pecos, etc. And they made this whole industry of traveling HFC deals.
And all you had to do was, pay $1 million, $500,000, whatever, to a consultant, and they'd go away forever.
Which sounds like a lot, but like compare that to property taxes on like a 100-unit multifamily.
It's nothing. I mean, and think of the residual value that you create too. So again, there's no free lunch.
Well, there kind of was.
There was for a while, but it was like a free buffet that closes at like 2:30.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people got the traveling HFC done at like 1:57.
Well, that's the beauty of it, right? The reason we're talking about the traveling HFC thing right now is because the Texas Senate passed probably the most punitive version of this bill. It was called HB 21. It sailed through the House, and then last week it sailed through the Senate as well. So now it's heading to the desk of Governor Abbott. And look, everyone knew this was going away, right? The uncertainty was in how severe would the HFC killer bill be. It turns out like they went for the most hardcore version of this thing.
It turns out that stealing a bunch of money from municipalities is something that both parties can get behind trying to stop.
The issue here is there's a retroactive component to this bill. And what I wonder about is what that looks like on the capital market side. Like what's a lender going to do with something like that?
If they don't do anything, every sponsor is going to go into default because you've just nuked NOI by a huge amount.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, though, is that if there is retroactivity and then the sponsors have to come out of pocket for however much they would have owed in property taxes. I mean, a lot of these deals were on life support anyway, so they barely had enough money to pay the consultants. How are they going to claw that back? I mean, and then if you aren't paying property taxes, then you're immediately in default on your loan as well. So it's a really interesting question. I don't know.
We're not talking about Mickey Mouse sponsors here, by the way. I should say, look, if you're a fiduciary to your investors, at some point you had to do this. Like, oh yeah, you couldn't leave this on the table. Like this is the easiest free money. If you didn't take it, you're an idiot.
We should have led with that up front. Like, you absolutely should have done this. I would have done this if the states that I operate in had this. Are you kidding?
The other thing here is there was so much political backlash to this, right? I mean, you're basically stripping off the tax rolls in all these important cities, Austin, Houston, Dallas, etc. So there is a little bit of reputational risk when it came to traveling HFCs.
I think that's right. But it's just, if you see a scheme, like, again, I don't blame anyone for doing it, but like, it's a scheme, like for sure. Yeah. And anytime you see a scheme, like it's going to get, the loophole's going to get closed. I mean, this is like in New York when it's like, oh, if we just treat a tenant like crap, turn off the hot water, get them out, and then spend, $100,000 renovating it, it becomes free market. It's the same thing. Like, it's a scheme.
I love it when a plan comes together.
I thought about this too. I said the whiplash and how sudden and how dramatic and how violent this is going to be reminded me a lot of the 2019 rent reforms in New York City, where all these landlords, there was an unbelievable example. Steve Spinola, he used to run Rebney, which is the big trade group out of New York, once called Charlie Bagley, who was a New York Times real estate reporter, and he calls him from within the Senate chambers while he's writing a pro-industry version of this law. Like, the brazenness of this fucking thing was crazy. And that's what kind of rhymes with what's going on at traveling HFCs.
Well, it's a little bit different too, because if you have a building that got underwritten with no property taxes, you can't ever make that up. Like, if your property taxes were $500,000, like,
you can't operate the hell out of it to rescue that, right?
No. And like, at least on rent stabilized, you have some sort of specter of like the rent laws change. There's something where you can potentially take more units to free market, or at the very least, like, they're still operable in some cases. Like if this is just done, you're just like, it's just toast. If you had a building with $3 million of NOI and the property taxes were 800 grand and like really your NOI is 2.2.
Yeah.
You got to grow your NOI 30%.
Sponsors might be shit out of luck, but the consultants, I mean, this was a golden period. Remember, we've talked about Nick Mastriani, the EB5 kingpin, and that 3-year glory period where he probably made hundreds of millions of dollars in fees, raising all these billions of dollars for developers.
It's like when the same divorce, nobody wins except the attorneys. Like nobody wins here. The lenders lose.
Yeah.
Investors lose. The consultants do great.
Well, I'm excited today because we have one of our Texas guys is going to join us. He was my Sherpa on this Traveling HFC journey. He was really helpful. We're talking about Barrett Linburg. He's a principal at Savoy Equity, which is a Texas-based developer and operator. Barrett was instrumental in helping the promote understand what the fuck these are.
The Tenzing Norgay of the Traveling HFCs.
Oh, there he is. Boom.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. You sound good.
Excellent.
Barrett, why were you so critical of the program? I mean, it's Will and I were talking about, like, if you're a fiduciary to your investors, you kind of had to do this for a while. Like, it was a no-brainer almost.
Sure. So the reason I'm critical of it is because my firm uses the PFC program. We use local partners, and we believe that PFC and HFC are excellent tools for creating affordable housing throughout the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling HFC, we believe, does not create affordable housing. In many, many cases, 95% of the cases that it's used, but it does give a tax abatement. So it's a strain on the local municipalities where it's being approved. To your point, though, to the people who own the properties, they don't really have another choice. Yeah. It's either give back the property or kind of hold their nose and do this deal and live to fight another day.
How did this come about? We were talking about this just before you came on. Like, it's a scheme. It's just a total scheme.
So PFC has only been around for 10 years. And so the loophole kind of showed up and then it was closed pretty quickly. HFC's been around for 40 years. So this loophole has existed for the entire time. It just took people a long time to figure it out. And now all of a sudden people started using it because they figured it out after PFC kind of showed the loophole to everyone. Now people started using it. Despair created the monster.
Where we're at now is that the Senate has passed the most punitive version of this HFC killer, right?
So this is the nuclear bill. And so it has retroactivity, and it has retroactivity in two ways. The bill will affect both what I call good actors. So people who have done deals with local municipalities that were approved by city councils where the properties actually live.
Yeah.
And it affects them by saying, if you're not creating enough affordability, and the way that that's defined is so much affordability that it's equal to or greater than 50% of the property tax abatement that you're creating. If you're not creating that much, then you owe the state of Texas money every year until you start creating that affordability. So that's number one.
The enough part of it is where it's going to get murky, right? The math is going to get all messy over the how it's calculated, what affordability looks like. Did you meet the requirements at the time?
How is market rent calculated? So yeah, the math is hard, first of all, and then like, what is enough? And why are you paying the state of Texas instead of the market that the property actually lives in? Like all these things. So, but it catches the people who actually were living within the spirit and the letter of the law, mm-hmm. and it's clawing them back retroactively.
Yeah, and that's something I just wanted to mention too, and talk about a little bit, is that people were using this for good. Like part of the way you can lower your rents is if you lower your operating expenses. And so if you're getting a tax abatement in apartments that would otherwise rent for $2,000 or being made available for $800, mm-hmm. like that's the spirit of the bill. And everybody, that's a win-win. The developer is able to make their same yield. It's just a different way to get there than with a market rate deal. And the local municipality gets more affordable housing. And, in exchange for that, they give up the property tax revenue. Municipalities are willing to give up that tax revenue for those benefits.
Right.
But not if you're just bringing this in from somewhere else and your rents are going to be below.
Yeah. So like in Dallas, to get a project approved, it has to go through HFC, then the Housing and Homelessness Committee, then City Council, and then back to HFC. So you've got like 100 people touching a deal before it gets approved. And they've all decided that the project is worthy of the tax abatement before it gets done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the process that's been followed for decades. And so now all of a sudden the legislator has said, well, we don't like it. It's not creating enough affordability compared to the market rate that we've decided is the appropriate one. And so now potentially these developers and the projects are going to go broke. And like, is that right? I don't know. It scares me very much as a PFC developer with another Texas legislative session coming up, because what if that now applies to all my projects, which I've done with a local partner approved by a city council? Like, could that retroactively apply to me?
Right.
Even though PFC was reformed 2 years ago and I'm following the spirit and the letter of the law. This bill also retroactively goes after people who were what I think are bad actors doing deals like within the letter of the law, but certainly not within the spirit of the law.
We actually heard about a couple of California guys who went out to one of these jurisdictions, set up shop, and were offering this as a service, right? And we were talking about this cottage industry of lawyers, consultants, debt brokers who all rushed into this over the last, call it 18 months and made a lot of money.
Guys like you and I, right, who just understood it well enough to kind of be the top of the funnel for some of these HFCs, charging hundreds of thousands of dollars per deal and doing dozens of deals. I mean, it's pretty easy multiplication to do to realize that the guys who were top of the funnel for the HFC were making millions of dollars.
Can we talk a little bit about that document showing all the entities?
That was shared pretty widely, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago.
That was the one where, like, if you don't act now, you're fucked.
Basically a warning to all the local municipalities saying, listen, you need to really be talking to the folks in Austin, letting them know how important it is to outlaw this deal, because your tax base is going to disappear or shrink by hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And the question is it going to continue, or is it going to be retroactive and these properties are going to be put back on the tax rolls? And that's where this nuclear option that has retroactivity, like, will that last? Or is it going to be another bill, potentially this competing bill? And is the governor going to have to decide which one, which is an extraordinarily strange thing that I've never heard of.
How do you live and work in Texas, man? This is like, even for New Yorkers, this is like, what is this? Yeah, I'm just thinking through the capital market side of this. What does this look like for Freddie? What does this look like at the CMBS, on the CMBS desk? How do you underwrite this? How do you talk to your sponsors? I have no idea.
Well, you've just put into context, though, the amount of money and the amount of power that's going to be influencing and trying to call the governor's office to say, sign the less restrictive bill.
Yeah, and then on the other side, this is going to cause real implications across these larger cities. If all of a sudden, what happens if there's, $500 million less of property taxes in San Antonio? Like, what happens to like bus systems, trash pickup?
That's already a known number, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's already been, billions of dollars of property value taken off the tax rolls. The average mill rate in Texas is 2%. So you're talking about $5 billion. It's $100 million a year. And that's already off the tax rolls for the next 100 years.
And then the other side of it, which is a little more abstract now, but let's say down the road, they want to incentivize the creation or preservation of affordable housing. And lawmakers come up with, okay, we need a new mechanism. We need a new carrot for developers. When they put that together, someone's going to look back at like, do you remember the craziness that happened with traveling HFCs? Developers don't deserve any more carrots. Like, they've already pillaged the property tax rolls, right? That's the second order consequence of something like this being abused for so long.
Yes.
It's the same thing as before the tax laws got changed in 86, and you were just hugely incentivized to build shopping centers and office buildings that had no reason to exist other than for taxes. And then that rule changed and we had 60 million vacant square feet of office. just in like New York City alone.
Barrett, since the last question for you, but since the bill passed the Senate, what's the chatter been like?
A bit of it is disbelief. Even the biggest lobbyists that are most tuned in down in Austin did not believe that the House bill would even get to a vote. And so then when it actually came up for a vote, that was a huge surprise. And so then it got through to the Senate, won there with a huge majority. I think it's been a lot of disbelief since then, a lot of scrambling. That being said, I think all of these traveling HFCs have been busier than ever over the past 10 days.
It's the best part.
Because this Betancourt bill still has legs.
Yeah.
And the Betancourt bill does not have retroactivity. And so if it were to be the one that passes, then they're all good.
Will, do you remember the scene in The Saint where Elizabeth Shue's running towards the American embassy and the gates are closing? It's kind of what I'm thinking about here. Barrett Linburg, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Barrett. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
I mentioned last week that the podcast was getting a little depressing because we were talking about how many people have lost money or ruined
or scammed money
frankly our first story is about that, but I wanted to break the chain. I've been rereading House of Outrageous Fortune about 15 Central Park West, and given that the Zeckendorf Brothers are back in the news having launched sales at their latest creation, 80 Clarkson, wanted to talk about it because these guys, one, do not miss, and two, they're making their first big foray into Lower Manhattan, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, they were always kind of they stayed around the park. They had 15 Central Park West, which is for a long time was the most profitable condo in New York City history.
In House of Outrageous Fortune, it sounds so quaint because they opened the book talking about how Carl Icahn and Dan Loeb fighting over like a $42 million apartment. And I'm like, that barely gets you a townhouse on Bedford right now.
Yeah, think of Mickey Naftali's 11,000 a foot upcoming condo.
Yeah.
But paint the picture for us on how 80 Clarkson / 570 Washington comes about.
Well, you can really thank Google for this thing existing. So it's right south of the St. John's Terminal, which, is a humongous project that Google ended up buying. So you can tell that this has been gestating for a long time, because when was the last time that Google was buying an office building for $2 billion? So I think it was part of like the same assemblage. So Westbrook had owned it for a million years. I think with Atlas, and they'd gone through the ULURP process, the rezoning process, and this site, which was just like a vacant lot, it was an acre and a quarter, sort of right on the West Side Highway, and incredibly prime. You had 160 Leroy just up the street, which Ian Traeger likes. Billiton was successful. Westbrook put the site up for sale. Atlas had been looking for a JV partner to help them build it, and you had sort of a who's who of folks in New York looking at this site, because very rarely do you get clean sites like this.
Larry Silverstein, Mickey Naftali,
Vornado,
so many other big players.
Exactly. But Zeckendorf won out, and these guys are the kings of Uptown, as we talked about. I mean, 15 Central Park West, 520 Park. This is a big venture downtown for them, and to make the numbers work, they paid $350 million for the site.
Yeah,
you had to ask $5,000 a unit, which seems pretty high.
Unbelievable at that time, right? Even now, I mean, it's a lot for downtown.
Totally. And you have real comps.
I guess one of the more successful ones would be like 443 Greenwich.
Yeah.
The celebrity hub, the bunker entrance and whatnot.
Yeah, Taylor Swift had a unit there, I think.
I don't track that.
No, she didn't. She was up the street. Jennifer Lawrence had a unit at 443 Greenwich. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah.
So this also is interesting because I think it's emblematic of the change in capital markets over the last 3 years. So they buy this site in 2022, in March of 22, I think.
Who gets them the acquisition loan?
BX,
Blackstone.
Yeah, Blackstone gives them a $320 million acquisition pre-dev loan. And Newmark, I think, also raised like $400 million of equity for them too. So Baupost is now, I think, in the
Is that Seth Klarman? I feel like there's a legend
it's Seth
from
Klarman.
another. Yeah, it's Seth Klarman. Okay.
Yeah, Seth Klarman.
You can cook on Balpost for a minute. I mean, they're popping up quite a bit.
Balbus has done a lot of condo, mostly on the credit side. So they've been up and down 57th Street with some pretty high octane mezz lending. They have done a lot of real estate. They famously have an evergreen fund, and so they've done a lot of land, a lot of sort of esoteric real estate.
Yeah,
I'm not sure they've done anything on the equity side as developers, more on the credit side. So that was very interesting. But it took them 2 years to land the construction financing. And so they got it from Kale Street and Farallon. So I know you've talked about Kale Street.
Yeah, they were on the Promotes Quiet Kings of Capital list. What do we know about Kale Street?
I don't know a ton. You're the king of Kale.
So Kale Street's super interesting. They're backed by the Kuwaitis. All right. So they have there's a Kuwaiti sovereign wealth fund, which has a $250 billion London arm. And that's what Kale Street gets their money from. They don't do too many deals, but the ones they do, they count. Make it simple but significant, as Don Draper used to say. In April, they led a construction loan for a Century City office tower, JMB. That was a $575 million debt package. Here, they're the co-lead on a nearly $1 billion financing. So they're coming in, and then Farallon is the other one. I think they were founded...
Tom Steyer.
Yeah, Tom Steyer, for merger arbitrage purposes.
Correct.
They were big in the LBO crisis, coming out of the LBO crisis.
Some famous merger arb guy said in a book one time, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to merger arb, he eats for his life.
Well, at least in this case, it's pretty true. So they've been in real estate, I want to say, since the mid-90s.
This is par for the course for them. Zeckendorf had been using the Blackstone loan, obviously, to acquire the site and then do pre-construction. So it's now going vertical. And they quietly... tiptoed around, Pink Panthered it.
This is kind of the opposite of what HFZ did with the 11, which was the most ridiculous, ostentatious sales launch I've ever seen in my life. Macallan 25 on tap, by the way.
I don't have anything to say there. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, you will not see this on season 2 of Owning Manhattan in all likelihood. But they released 22 units in March. At a $430 million sellout. The asking prices per foot were in the mid-5s. And then this month, they just released 16 more units for $360 million. Price per foot's now north of $6K.
Again, no fanfare, right? They're just kind of dropping these on the market. We talked last time about this kind of media blitz when a project of a certain stature comes up. This was the opposite of that. They didn't talk about it at all.
Exactly. And I don't think they needed to.
Cachet to that, right? It's like the door in the speakeasy.
Oh, totally.
There's something quite sexy about that too.
Yeah, it's the bathtub gin of condo projects. And John Landau was at a conference recently and said that he heard of a condo project that sold $500 million worth of condos in 30 days. And people think this is what he was referring to. A bunch of brokers have been commenting on having deals done there without a ton of specifics.
Yeah.
We've liked projects that really go for it, and the Zeckendorfs frickin' go for it.
They always go for it, and this is not just so they obviously had the Limestone Jesus 15 CPW, but prior to that as well, I think their project was called 1010 Park Avenue.
Yep.
That was kind of the test case for 15 CPW. And there was an amazing article in the New York Times. It said something like, living on Fifth Avenue with room for the servants. 15 CPW was kind of the maximal vision of this Zeckendorf type of living. 520 Park is a continuation, and now they're trying the same thing downtown.
It's very modern, and it looks not dissimilar to 160 Leroy. And then there's also this large affordable senior component on it, because I think that was what allowed you to get the additional FAR to build more condos and get the density. You have 2 towers, that is a Zeckendorf thing. They did it at 15th Central Park West, again, to get more FAR. This is just a big swing. So when we talked about Mickey Naftali at 800 Fifth, this is that for downtown. I would say the locations, you're on the West Side Highway. The views are incredible. It's not like prime Tribeca, like 70 Vestry is like the mid, it's a better location. This is a little bit in what the Men in Blazers would call like the crap part of Soho. Uh-huh. It's not too far from the methadone clinic, I don't think, that they used to mention all the time.
This is a good point, which I think is really, if the product is good enough, can it kind of override the location handicap, right? We think about this quite a bit. In some cases, Fifth Avenue is Fifth Avenue. You can't really mess with that. But 57th Street is kind of proof that you can do that.
It's a great point because 57th Street by itself, there's not a lot there.
Shittiest part of Manhattan, in my opinion, for a long time.
Yeah, it's all about the view. And so the views here are going to be spectacular. And these guys don't do a ton of projects. They've done, 3 in the last 15 years?
Yeah.
So they take their time. When they find a site that they like, that works, they pay up for it.
There's a great anecdote in the New Kings of New York to that point where they bought 15 CPW from some Greek shipping family. And then I think Arthur or Will, one of the brothers, says, we went in with our best number from day one. Like, we went back to our board, we pushed our pro formas as far as we could, and then we went even higher when we wrote that figure. And then they beat, I think, the competing bidders by just that much. And it made all the difference.
You take the road less traveled to 5,000 a foot, and it made all the difference.
That's it for the pod this week. Thanks again to Barrett Linburg from Savoy Equity for joining us.
That was great, Barrett. Really appreciate it.
Thank you to our listeners.
Share, like, subscribe.
And Will, thank you too.
Thank you.
Ciao.